Some maybe hour and a half later, I said, Srila Prabhupada, may I take a cigarette break? He peeked his head around the corner and said, go wash your hands. It was then that Srila Prabhupada told me about the 4 rules and regulations. And that when we cook for Krishna, this is the beginning of the quality of purity. Beginning first instruction on the quality of purity. Some 3 hours later, maybe it was close to 5 hours, I was making kachoris. I said, it was very hot in the room, and I took my arm and I wiped my forehead, and Srila Prabhupada saw it, and he said, go wash your hands. So he began to explain first idea of cleanliness. He said, when we cook for Krishna, we wear clean clothes. Our clothes don't come in contact with the... Do you need something? We don't allow the clothes to touch Krishna. We wear clean clothes only when cooking for Krishna. In this way, in the very first day, Srila Prabhupada began to give me some little instruction. And over the next 11 years, I had the fortune of many different situations where Srila Prabhupada gave me some little training in this art of cooking for Krishna. So how many people in this audience have rendered some personal service to their lordships in Sri Sri Radha Gopinath Mandir by doing some cooking for their pleasure? Please raise your hand. A rather small group. I am sure that the standard that you have established here is perhaps the highest in ISKCON, especially with the guidance of the 2 saintliest pujaris in ISKCON. But there are many places where, especially in the West, it's very hard to engage in the simplest kind of instructions. I had one piece of paper. A little piece of typing. There it is. I wanted to read to you a couple points that Srila Prabhupada said into a letter in 1968. This is only 2 years after ISKCON has been founded, to a disciple in Los Angeles who asked him some questions, little basic questions. And here's what Srila Prabhupada sent to him. This was on June 16th, 1967, The main thing is that whatever is cooked for Krishna and offered to the Lord, everything should be done very respectfully and cleanly prepared and offered. You should offer everything in a very clean and pure manner. So that means different things to different people, what clean and pure manner means. So Srila Prabhupada is now going to help us to understand what that means in the simplest terms. Krishna is neither hungry nor is Krishna poor, nor is he unable to eat, but he will accept everything, the foods mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, when it is offered to him with 3 things: love, devotion, and faith. So we could take this simple sentence, and no matter how advanced you are or how long you have practiced Krishna consciousness, we can go deeper into the purport and the meaning of these 3 things: love, devotion, and faith. There is no end to the depths of this simple statement. Srila Prabhupada once said to me that Srimati Radharani is expert in everything. In Braj Bhumi and Braj Dham, there is no one who pleases Krishna more. She is most expert for her dancing. But she pleases Krishna with her cooking. And every day, with every time she cooks for Krishna, she never makes the same thing twice. This is eternally something that Srimati Radharani is doing for the pleasure of Krishna. Eternally. So we see what expertise means. We see what love, faith, and devotion means through Radharani's service to Krishna in this one capacity, just one thing, of which she is expert in everything. So vast is this vehicle for serving the senses of the Lord. All right. Talking within the kitchen should be done only at what is necessary for the preparation of prasadam or about the Lord. When you cooked with Srila Prabhupada, he did not chat. There was no conversation. For instruction, there was question and answer, but not other than that. To watch Srila Prabhupada in the kitchen was like watching a true artist. How he used his hands was extraordinary. I had never seen anyone bray, knead, chop, whip, do so many things with movements in his hands. He was extremely efficient. Once in Vrindavan in the late time of 1976, in a time when his very close godbrother Bhagaji was cooking for him, Srila Prabhupada said that he could cook for 30 people on one burner in 1/2 hour a meal. And the person challenged him and said, that's not possible. And Prabhupada said, do you want to see me do it? And he backed down and said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I believe you. He was so very expert that he taught by example. He never told us to do something that he couldn't do himself, very expertly. He learned to cook by watching others, not in a brahmachari ashram. Most specifically, he said his mother and his auntie he learned cooking from, and by watching street vendors. He said he learned a great deal from watching them as well. There are certain rules that must be followed. No offered food should be brought back into the kitchen. This offered food is a practice in your country, but in temples or in homes of the Krishna conscious person, one should never indulge in such an unclean habit. If there is any leftover food, it must be kept separately. So there's so many examples I could give of Srila Prabhupada with this. One was at the estate of John Lennon in Prabhupada's service. And it was what we call a no-facility zone when you're traveling with Srila Prabhupada and you're placed in a situation where it isn't a Vaishnav kitchen, neither are there Vaishnavas to help with the standard of cleanliness. This was the servants' quarters to a very big estate. There was no facility. And he saw his brahmachari assistant, Purushottam Prabhu. He saw him bringing some food back. Now this ISKCON is 3 years old now. Srila Prabhupada wrote this letter in 1967, and he expected that every one of his disciples by this time would know this standard and would make arrangements, no matter what or how simple, that arrangements should be made. So it doesn't need to be complex. Simply there's a line. This is for offered prasad, this is for unoffered prasad. What is in the difficulty of following kitchen rules? They are rules, they are simple rules, and they must be followed. One must be prepared to follow rules for Krishna. Otherwise, where is the proof that one loves Krishna? We come into the love aspect again. If we're not willing to follow rules, where is love? And besides that, these rules are not difficult to follow. Srila Prabhupada made the art of and the practice of Krishna consciousness so enticing and so salient and so accessible that it became attractive for any person that really was willing to listen to it. Just like you're coming as a guest today, and you may have not experienced this Krishna conscious environment. But imagine if someone took you by the hand and sat you down with a pile of flour and said, here's how you do. That every one of us in this room had a beginning time where they were invited by a transcendental personality to taste their first sampling of cooking for Krishna in the kitchen. So for any of you who have times of weakness, sometimes maybe not the strongest faith that you would like to have, or the deepest devotion, or a sense of love, just remember that you can do this. These aren't hard things to do. They're very easy things to do. And by doing them, we hope to somehow please Krishna's senses. There are so many ways that I could give stories to illustrate over the years how Srila Prabhupada brought the qualities of these three items: quality, purity, and cleanliness. Certainly in that, the things that were all mentioned by you are important in the kitchen. The element of promptness must be there in every temple. There's a schedule that's followed in the Holy Dham. Every temple has a routine that's followed, from the example of Jagannath Puri, where 56 offerings are made a day, to the simplest home temple, where the persons in the home live very busy lives, and they try to do all of their worship in a meaningful way with love, devotion, and faith. So no matter how simple or how complex, what we want to do is explore these three elements. In Chaupati Temple, you have in your leader someone who has been able to impart to you the essence of these qualities, not only in the kitchen, because in every atom of this temple room, from the street outside to the first step that you take onto the courtyard in front of the temple, every aspect, every atom of this environment is surcharged with quality, purity, and cleanliness. So that no matter how you are studying Krishna consciousness or how you're practicing Krishna consciousness, you have access to these three powerful, powerful qualities to use in Krishna's service. So what we need to do is help each other. And by each person who tries to go deeper into these elements, and then they share it with others, this will spread to a broader and broader section of the public. I once met a man who was a professional chef that came up at a book signing I was doing in Philadelphia. And he said, you know, I've never read a cookbook like this, Lord Krishna's Cuisine. He said, I've been trained by the most famous chefs in the world. He said, and I'm executive chef at such and such restaurant. He said, but this book, he said, I read it every night before I go to bed because there's things in it that I never heard that were related to cooking. And he said, I want to learn what this is. This is different than any other cooking I ever did. And when he said that, I was thinking back to Prabhupada, that this cooking is different than anything any of us have ever done. And the more we share even this one thing, everyone has to feed their families. We all need to breathe air, drink water, and take a little sustenance. So if we can take this one element in whatever we put in our mouths, to try to do it through the process of Krishna conscious cooking, for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to honor our Guru and our teachers and our Sampradaya, we should take advantage of that and share. I don't want to take any more of your time because I could speak for a long time on this subject matter. But if any of you have any questions at all on these three aspects, or any questions that you may have read about in relationship to Srila Prabhupada and his cooking or his teaching of cooking, I could try to answer them for you.
We have a conflict in our temple also in this regard.
I've often broken Srila Prabhupada and his pastimes into three: Adi, Madhyam, and Antya. Even in relationship to the kitchen, the first years from 1966 to 1970 is the Adi. So in those days, we thought that everything that was especially rich in ghee had a lot of what we call soured cream in the United States. It would be like double malai. If you just make with lots of ghee and put double malai in it, everything's tasty. Or a lot of sugar. We make things, many things with sugar. So for the first 3 years, that was almost the standard of what was delicious and what we wanted to serve to Krishna. The next phase was between 70 and 75. In that phase, it was in October of 1970, October 4th, 1970, that the first devotees from Europe and America arrived in Mumbai. And from the moment that we were in a party with Srila Prabhupada, and he brought us more or less around India for the next year and a half, till March of 72, when the Mayapur cornerstone and the Vrindavan cornerstone were laid of these two big temples. Before, we didn't have temple construction. That was the beginning. So in that period, we traveled with Srila Prabhupada on the Sammelan circuit. That means to Pandal programs around India, and sometimes to little programs, in whether it was the Magh Mela, where we lived in the tents with Srila Prabhupada, or in the homes of saintly Vaishnava souls. We were told to study cooking in the kitchens. Almost every time I was with Srila Prabhupada, at the end of every meal, he'd say to me, "Go in the kitchen. Do you know how to make this? If not, go in the kitchen." So we started to study a little bit the regional cuisines of India and get a rudimentary sense of the art of cooking regional cuisines in a traditional way. So when the idea of speculation came up, that was brought into a little more clarity. That yes, if Radharani cooks differently for Krishna every single time, does not mean she's speculating. No? It means that she's pleasing Krishna's senses by making fresh something wonderful for Krishna. So the beginning glimpse of what that was happened in that period. By 1975 to 1977, a really unique era with Srila Prabhupada was brought into focus, the beginning focus. And that means that this business of purity came to light. Prior to that, we would use pre-ground masala, whether it was jira or haldi or dhanya, didn't matter. But from 1976 onward, he would have the devotees buy seeds or roots, fresh grind everything. So now instead of dry, in the first phase of ISKCON, everything's done with seeds. There's cumin seed, there's dhanya seed, there's mirch, whole mirch or crushed mirch, and powdered haldi, salt and pepper. That was the beginning of ISKCON cooking. Then came in rye and hing, few more things. This last period, Prabhupada wanted everything done in paste masala, wet. So we started to get an idea from him when you say bhagar or chunk, that there are so many different ways to do this. You can do a Bengali bhagar chunk very fast, very high heat. Toss it in. If your timing isn't very good, immediately it's burned. Or you may find in Gujarati cuisine where you take a paste masala and you cook it very, very slow heat for 10, 15 minutes. You let layers and layers of flavor come out. So Srila Prabhupada started to reveal to us more about the art in each different period. So as students trying to begin to get a hint into what cooking for Krishna means, the art of cooking for Krishna, we want to keep expanding our foundation, like in every aspect of Krishna consciousness. There's never a time where, I know this. Because the simplest concept to the most complex concept, we are always learning more. There's always more to learn. Whether it is how to handle those cumin seeds in one of very direct 5 regional cuisines, or the subtleties of different traditions in every household that honors those cuisines, there's more to learn. We can look from the temple chefs that have been preserving the art of cooking for Krishna for hundreds of years. I had the inconceivable opportunity, by the grace of my Guru Maharaj, to be the first woman allowed in the temple kitchen at Radha-Raman temple in Vrindavan to begin to study the art that they have preserved for hundreds of years, the standards that they have preserved, handed down so carefully, honored, and explored more deeply with every person that touched it. That's what we want to do. We want to honor the temple that we live in by finding out what the tradition is now, exploring how we can serve Krishna more deeply within that, the confines of that, and by helping each other to go more deeply into these 3 qualities. So Srila Prabhupada, the one remarkable thing about even this phase of cooking was that he taught something, then he saw if the disciple digested what he taught. In other words, they practiced what he taught. Then he'd go on to something else. It's interesting that I can give the example that in 1966, Prabhupada taught how to make badi chachri and khichdi to us in San Francisco, and that's 67. And in Rishikesh in 1977, he taught his senior sannyasi disciples the same things that he taught us in 1967, because they hadn't had that personal instruction. They were so advanced, so extraordinary preachers, but they hadn't learned this. So Prabhupada was teaching what he taught to them. One of those happens to be one of the most refined and cultured Vaishnav, Bhakti Charu Maharaj, who's so expert in cooking and so expert in music and so expert in philosophy. But at that time, he was teaching the same thing he taught in 67. So these things never become outdated. They don't think they're old. But we want to go deeper into actually exploring the way Srila Prabhupada taught, because he's our founder Acharya, and go more deeply into what your own Guru Maharaj is teaching you. Every instruction he gives, even in just relation to this one thing, embrace it with your heart and try to remember it very sincerely and practice it. Because in this way, by the mercy of your Guru Maharaj, you will please Krishna. That's one way to answer that question. I'm sure there's many other examples I could give, Prabhu. Thank you. Any other questions? You want to pass that microphone to the Prabhu?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Mataji.
Thank you.
My wife, when she cooks, I am also invariably at home because I do my business from my residence. Sometimes the cooking is excellent, sometimes mediocre, and sometimes the salt is slightly more. So I, after it's being offered, then she tells me to taste. And sometimes I find her confidence is a bit low while cooking. She knows very well, she's very excellent cook and all those things, but she lacks confidence. Now, how to boost this confidence?
Srila Prabhupada's senses were so astute that before I could cook something and put down the thali, and he would look at it and sometimes ask a few questions, but above the desire that I had to please him through the service was consciousness. Prabhupada could tell before he tasted a bite the consciousness of the cook. Now, you are all developing this to some degree, I am sure. But there were times I can remember when I was struggling so much in the holy dham of Vrindavan. It was a very difficult time in my life. I was, for that reason, felt I should not cook for my Guru Maharaj. My consciousness is not strong. It's engaged in mundane thinking, mundane complaints. So I'm not fit to cook for him. And in one such time, I was at doing some little service somewhere else, and another Vaishnavi who really wanted to cook for Prabhupada, I had left an arrangement for her to do that service. So Prabhupada was calling every day, where's Yamuna, why isn't she cooking? So I was so embarrassed, I didn't even want to go see Srila Prabhupada to tell him how miserable was my consciousness. But he was really pushing. It was like Balaram with a plow. I could feel him all the way down in Fogalashram. Prabhupada's pulling me with his plow. So finally I come and Prabhupada said, so I was going to leave tomorrow, but I want you to cook, so I'm going to stay another day. So I thought, I can't get out of this. So I tried to chant my rounds attentively, and first time I went to Vrindavan through a Goswami and Radharaman temple, he taught me a little bit about making a certain kind of fulka that was prepared in Radharaman Mandir using PC Lahore wheat and freshly grinding and making paper thin, cooking on gobhar and neem. And So I had pleased Srila Prabhupada a little bit once by making such polkas. This time when I am coming to make this prasad, I'm making just like this, repeating through the movements. And Satsvarupa Maharaj was then in Srila Prabhupada's service as personal servant. He brings in the polka to Srila Prabhupada, comes back in the kitchen and said, Srila Prabhupada wants me to teach you how to make chapatis. And I said, oh Maharaj, I'd be so grateful if he could teach me how to make chapatis. So you know when you're cooking on a coal fire and you're making fulkas and the tawa's on the fire and the heat's right, everything's right. If you wait for too long before putting on a fresh fulka, the tawa gets too hot, right? So in the time it takes for Satsvarupa Maharaj to sit down, to roll out a chapati, the tawa's on the stove, on the chula. He rolls out the chapati, puts it on. Naturally, the tawa is very hot. First thing that happens, it burns little holes in it, right? So I said, Maharaj, can you tell me when it's time to turn over fulka? He said, when little pimples come on the top and little burn spots on the bottom. Oh, thank you very much, Maharaj. So he turns it over. Then it's burned, right? The little pimples are now burned. So it can't fill up with air. So we know that a properly prepared fulka is cooked a little over 4/5 on the tawa. And then when put over the coals, the inside is cooked the other 1/5 with hot air. So you've got just the right amount of char-flavored specks from the coals. The dough is cooked properly through, and from the inside, through the hot air. So when Satsvarupa Maharaj puts the chapati on the coals, it doesn't blow up. It's now like little kind of cracker. So I said, can you give me any more guidelines than this? No, this is good. So he puts it on the chapati, brings it into Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada takes a bite of the chapati, and he comes back in the kitchen and he says, so Prabhupada wants to know if you can learn to make like this. So immediately I knew Srila Prabhupada could see my consciousness, not even seeing my face. So important is it for us in the process of self-realization to look at what service we're trying to do for the pleasure of Guru Gauranga, Sri Radha Krishna, Jagannath Subhadra Balaram, whatever the Archa Vigraha is in your temple. And to be attentive to only really trying to please them and please Krishna, and really learn the art of cooking. So in this instance, it was a rope is a snake is a snake. Sometimes the spiritual master, he asked me to learn to make fulkas in this way, not so I could make them improperly, but because he wanted my consciousness purified. So it will happen if you're examining, that sometimes you're more attentive. Sometimes your senses are, for some reason, impure or unfocused. This happens. This is natural. But the more we practice, and the more we remind, never become lazy, that this is our goal. Not to become routine. Serving the deity isn't a routine function. It's a function based on love, faith, and devotion to Krishna. So that is not a routine function, neither a mechanical function. So that's really key. And sometimes you'll feel empowered. You'll feel actually the potency of your Guru Maharaj and be able to do extraordinary things. That's what this whole Chaupati is an inspiration of extraordinary Krishna consciousness. And there's no end to its increase. I can see it from even 5 years ago. The level of bhakti here is so palpable that it takes your breath away. Does that a little bit answer your question? It's internal. These things are internal, not external. Yes, my Mataji, Prabhu, could you speak loudly, really, really loudly? I think you have to pass this little thing, microphone.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Can we use cheese here in the temple? We don't use cheese in Radha Gopinath Mandir.
Could you say that word, teeth?
Cheese.
Cheese. These kinds of things are, you decide. You decide what standard you want for your deity. Huh? This morning I was served some cheese that was, there's two kinds of essentially cheese. One's called unripened cheese, and one is called ripened cheese. So unripened cheese means dehin, chana, paneer. These are unripened, they're fresh, taza. So these are traditional. The cheese, according to Ayurveda, that is ripened, that is hard to digest. So you may be following Ayurvedic standard. On the other hand, I heard there were some devotees that were making organic cheese of devotion with the ripened cheese. So if you decide to serve that to Krishna, that's, you decide, you ask your Guru Maharaj. It's not traditional, but for example, I never served Prabhupada quinoa. Does anyone here know what quinoa is? Raise your hand if you know. Quinoa. Huh? So quinoa is a seed grain like kuttu, like buckwheat, that can be used on Ekadasi. That traditionally grew in the mountains of Peru, 7,000 feet altitude. Little tiny, like sama, only much more flavor, and one of the highest protein content of all seed grains, 14 to 17% protein, very high. So I never had an opportunity to serve that to Srila Prabhupada. And I'm not sure if he would have liked it, because he had a fondness for things that he was familiar with, especially from Bengali cooking. But I offer that in his service, because it's something Krishna put on the planet to use. Another is something like wild rice. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. This is another little seed grain that is like one of the, it's similar to one of the 7,000 varieties of rice that there are on the planet. This is 7,001. And it's a very nice thing. I use that in the service of Krishna. Or maybe here's another question for you. Suppose in this last 100 years we're using chini, huh? 100 years ago there weren't factories for making chini. So what did they use? How did they make rasgulla? White rasgulla. So they used something different then. Sometimes there are things that are made available different times on the planet that we use in Krishna's service. So what you want to do is decide a standard that glorifies your deity, that glorifies a tradition that you want to establish for your deity. Allow that tradition to breathe, but preserve its essence. Write it down, respect it, live it, and then share it with others. And change can be there. Change is all right, but only when it's decided that we're going to go this direction together, under the guidance of the Guru. Yes, Prabhu.
What do you think about making chocolate cakes? Chocolate cakes or ice creams or chocolate sweets? Is chocolate
That kind of falls in the same category as the cheese, yeah. However, I mean, hundreds of questions will ask. I believe that this issue of chocolato came up to the GBC recently. Didn't it? Didn't it? Yeah? And I think it was mentioned no chocolato. Wasn't that GBC? Final word? I was told this. I think this is true. I mean, it could be I was misinformed, but this was in the last 6 to 8 months. Some other, even in a local temple, somebody wrote me this question. So, you know, there have been over the years many different instructions. I had some personal ones by Srila Prabhupada. So far as ice cream, I can remember ice cream being sent from New Vrindavan to Srila Prabhupada in dry ice, and him tasting it and saying, this is very tasty. When we first came to India and tasted our first kulfi, which, you know, is a little different than ice made, a little different, everyone was so impressed. Now, 200, 300 years ago, I'm not sure how they made kulfi unless they brought ice from the Himalayas. So there is breathing. Just take that as the principle, that there's breathing according to time, place, and circumstance. But you decide what standard you want to do. I mean, I remember when I first came from India to the West, and for this Vaikalika Bhog, 4 o'clock in the afternoon Bhog, it had become vogue to do cookies and cakes. Huh? So in India, that was not there. In Mayapur now, what is offered at the 4 o'clock? Fruits, yes. So this is traditional, much more traditional than, but every temple was making many varieties of biscuits and cookies and cakes, and that's the standard that had been established at that time. So you decide, you can try to study from the glorious experts here in India, the pujaris from Mayapur, who really have studied with such pure heart so many aspects of worshipping the Archa Vigraha. And if you're interested in finding out traditional approaches to different offerings, ask them, and then set a standard and let it breathe, but preserve it. So that's a personal. Any other? I think it's getting very late, yeah? So we quit? Yes, Prabhuji.
One more question. I'm a practicing doctor at Bhaktivedanta Hospital.
I know.
So this question is related to health.
Yes.
And there is often a conflict between tasty prasad and health.
Yes.
They seem to be going always, sort of opposites.
Yes.
In your wonderful association with Srila Prabhupada, if you can share with us some of the aspects where you heard him talk about health and devotee prasad, which will be of use to all of us in a general way.
You know, there could be numerous examples of Srila Prabhupada caring about the health of his disciples. This is a glorious thing. First, in general, if he heard a disciple was indisposed or ill, he would try to get management to address that, which it was not doing on its own. So that's the first thing. As I watched Srila Prabhupada eat for his health, when we first met Srila Prabhupada, he could eat very large quantities of prasadam. We could eat Bengali style with nice big mound of rice, lots of fried things on the side, many fried items, many sweets, even though he had diabetes. And he didn't take diabetic medicine except for a little Ayurvedic medicine. But he ate what he wanted to eat. Always ate what he wanted to eat. And there would be various groups that would come to him with some idea of what health was. I can remember as early as 68, Kirtanananda in Los Angeles, January 68. He's left San Francisco, came on 14th, 1967, back from India. He was down in Los Angeles in January. Health was bad. He was getting pressure in his head from diabetes. So a contingent of his little mothers came, oh, Swamiji, you have to eat this. Then a group of his little father, he called us his mothers and fathers, his children sometimes. Swamiji, you have to eat this, you have to eat this. So maybe 1 day, 2 days he'd try and then eat what he wanted. Over the years, devotees have tried many things as health becomes an issue. So even amongst doctors, I'm sure there's many different approaches to what healthful eating is. I myself have had a lifelong struggle with my weight. So I know sometimes that I shouldn't eat what I do. But it's a very difficult thing to change eating habits for health reasons only. I noticed that with Srila Prabhupada, as he aged, he began to eat less and less. So in the beginning, he could eat this large quantity of food. Over the years, eating less. You put down a full thali, sometimes for the sheer intoxicating reason of reciprocating with his disciples, he would eat everything on his thali. But sometimes he would take a spoon, he ate with, if you ever seen films of Srila Prabhupada respecting prasadam, it's magic. How he respected. He didn't eat, he respected prasadam. And he would take little bite and savor. Generally, as he didn't talk in the kitchen, unless it was for preaching purposes, he didn't didn't talk during prasadam. He respected. So sometimes, and he would take up to 45 minutes for lunch prasad. I'm sure all of you have experienced that. Just while he's relishing for Krishna. But sometimes he take he would take with his spoon, little small silver spoon, take little bite and savor. As a personal cook, Prabhupada would sometimes say what he wanted in the morning, and you made that for health reasons. Sometimes he would tell his cook, especially for indigestion, as later it became harder for him to digest things. Not only quantity, but the kind of things. And partly also this last phase of 75, 77 of the masalas was that they are also easier to digest. So it was at this time that he began to hint a little bit about Ayurveda and what his constitutional type was. And for example, what we called his soaked chickpea ginger essential element of his breakfast. We find out in Ayurveda that that's something that is taken by Vata food types to increase the fire of digestion, and so Prabhupada took that. Certainly the element of Shukta, he said, very much the bitter helped him to digest. So he on an individual basis, that would allow some devotees to try different things. There was one Swami of his, Devananda-Swami, who in 1970 had practiced a certain kind of food regimen of eating what's called raw food. And although Prabhupada, he didn't eat all raw food, he didn't eat any grains or legumes, only vegetables. And when we were traveling in Nagar Sankirtan with Srila Prabhupada from this 70 period through 2000, March of 2 years later, 72, wherever we went, he would proudly say, "Oh, my Devananda Swami, he takes only vegetable and fruit. No grain, no legume. He is restricting." So he used that as a preaching platform, and he was proud of him for controlling his tongue in this way. So there's many, many examples I could give you of how Prabhupada would allow certain devotees to take certain kinds of prasadam and explore that for their health and well-being. And also if he saw that it was increasing their Krishna consciousness, especially in the austerity. He wasn't so proud when he saw his devotees overeat. Okay. I think if there are no more questions.